Good afternoon and most welcome to H919. And sitting outside here, and it's raining a little bit. Creates a cozy atmosphere for today's lecture, and it's about fractility. There is an interesting connection between fractility and fragility, because the concept of non-fragility, that is resilience, is very much connected to the complexion of what we are doing and what we are interacting with in the world. The more of the world you can interact with, the more you get from the small details in the iterations. It's a very keen interaction, and it gives for details in the lower filigranes of the fractality. It's most explicit, especially when you look at, for instance, the common plant, the fern, where you see at every level almost contradicting the very concept of scale that we all have well established within our thinking process. We see that the fern in itself defies the concept of scale. This is why we call fractality scale independence. It doesn't observe the common law, so to speak, of scale. It goes all over, from the very smallest to the biggest, constantly iterating itself. The concept iteration means that there is somewhat similar to repetition, but there is always a slight deviation, and I call that deviation difference. Well, you can compare it to difference, the Derridian concept of there being a difference, and the difference is what is giving the information. In the old concept we had two absolutely independent factors. We had the object on one side, and we did have the observing subject. And the idea is similar to looking into the mirror, that you have perfection on the part of the subject looking into the mirror, and that becomes a trope for our ideas. And that is the idea that somewhere behind the mirror image we have absolute perfection, and that absolute perfection gives a sense of origin. It also gives a sense of self-identity. We are constantly the same, and that is later being transferred also to the objects. So the objects become definite, and they take place in this homogeneous space of 3 dimensions. And all of a sudden, simultaneously, both from the side of the subject and the object, a whole world comes into place all at once, and it has an origin. From the origin we have this bead of cause and effect, like moments following a long string, going from the origin, from the start, all the way into the future end of everything. And in this future end of everything we have 2 starting points, so to speak, and they can go both directions. This is a way of showing how this works. We start with a sort of a big bang of all concepts. You have in the beginning nothing, and all of a sudden it has bloomed out, expanded out in all directions, locking each factor into place. And without one factor missing, the whole picture cannot be coherent, it cannot be corresponding to the external world, and it cannot be consistent. So those are the building blocks, so to speak, of this reality: consistency, coherency, and correspondence. Once this world is well established, it is impossible to break piecemeal. You cannot look at only one factor. Think about it this way. Why did Heidegger construct the concept of Dasein? Well, this is to get rid of this lockedness to the subject, because as soon as you start using the words observing, taking in, seeing, we always directly get the idea of the subject. And there is no way of getting out of that unless you construct a wholly new language. You learn the relationship between the bits in this new language and you use them instead. And it is in this newer, more intricate way you get this liberty of expanding your thinking, loosening up things that are well established in our world. The very establishment makes it impossible to break metaphysical presence in small pieces, but we need to erode it from the bottom. And once we start to erode it from the bottom, it gets sort of softer and softer, and until that moment comes when we break the whole thing at once, in one simple go, because they all have to give simultaneously. They were once produced simultaneous, and the locking effect is always confirming its own outcome. You see here there is a confirmation principle, and that confirmation principle in itself makes harder to have a sort of a crowbar to break it piecemeal. We've been doing this process for the whole 900 lectures, I would say. We have been eroding, especially on the part of the object, I would say, because quantum mechanics deals principally with the object side. It goes to show that there is a paradoxality evolving in the system, and it starts to making itself established and thereby blocking out other options, making what became established firm, self-confirming, because every time you look out in the world you will confirm the gestalt of the subject. So each of your doings is a confirmation. So it's also a habit that you perform every day. What do I mean by that? Well, I think there's a very interesting connection between myopia and this tendency of looking for the objects. This is this sharper gaze that developed in early antiquity among the pre-Socrats, when we got this harder, cruder division between what used to be a greater openness in the verbs, and all of a sudden we get an established object and subject. That also means that our gaze is becoming harder. We intentionally start to look for objects in the world, sort of tell us where are the objects, where are they defined, where are they localized, so they can take their place. And this goes for a tension in the eye muscle. And this is one of the causes. Actually, it is pointed out to be the most frequent causes for myopia, because you either focus into an area of your own thinking, which also leads, oddly enough, to tension in the eye muscle. In the end, the eyeball is becoming oval, and there you go, you have myopia. One of the tricks to get rid of object-directed vision, as you could call it in a clumsy word, is actually to move around blindfolded. That would stop you in a manner that is constrainment in the beginning, but once you get used to it, you get a milder look at the world, and that is also a warmer look. Other people can directly note that something happened to your gaze. It becomes less into the objects, it is more panoramic, but is also very, very good at getting to the details. And this is something we need to remember. This is a neurological thing as well. It has to do with how our neurological system has found a lower point of a chaotic organization. It sort of fell of the higher level somewhere in antiquity to a lower level, and in this lower level there has been a new equilibrium established. We have a new strange attractor, and everything gets this feeling of having fallen in place. This is also true when it comes to time. You confirm your memories to be real. For instance, yesterday's events, I go through them in my head over and over again, which is completely weird by itself. But by doing that process, I confirm that they were real. I put them in a random causal order, because there can only be randomness as long as you are in the random division of subject and object. It is not a willed division. Intention did not come into the picture when this happened. It was a pure random event that had disastrous effects, which became hidden, and this is of course the establishment of the ontic mode, where we ask the question, what is, instead of why is. So then it's actually more or less proper to say that there are different modes of seeing. And you could actually say that this more ontic way of taking in things is more on the side of myopia, close-mindedness, blocking out things in the purpose of getting your sort of sharpened attention, concentration in a rather bad way. You could also call it strained concentration. And then you no longer have this panoramic, relaxed vision. You no longer take in what's around you. Once you don't take in what's around you, not letting the space come in, you become less present. And as the tale goes, your body notices that immediately, your system notices it, and then is looking for presence. This is the start of the metaphysics of presence. It is a sound looking by its onset, because We need this presence to be happy, to be fulfilled, informed. But we go about looking at it in the mirror vision of perfection, of original. I would say when it comes to a document, the document maybe a couple of thousands years ago was showing its own originality. It was showing its own trueness, and that actually was a part of the object. Now, with the subject-object construction, we say that there is the subject that constructs rules for what is origin, what is the true document. And these rules can be bended, and an argumentation starts, which sort of rules should you do? This is the subjectification of knowledge. It becomes something distance contained within the subject, more in the direction of an opinion. No longer is the world containing knowledge of origin, and thereby you can directly see without any weight what is the origin and what is the copy. Of course, in the process we lose knowledge when we go to metaphysics of presence, and we can no longer take in reality, and we can no longer see what is the origin, and therefore everything becomes subjectified, diminished, weaker, much weaker. It becomes just an opinion. I remember I had a Belgian teacher. She always used to say, that's just a matter of opinion. And that's a symptom rather than cause of the whole thing. The subjectification has already started, and everything seemed to be something that the subject constructs. And therefore it gets incredibly less stable, weaker. It becomes a matter of opinion, and this weakness enters ourselves, and it also makes us sort of wait for the objects so we can perceive them in this really strange way of distance. That is often called putting on objective glasses or something of that sort. Be here very careful. Don't do the Jordan Peterson mistake and think that deconstruction is about taking away both subject and object. No, that's not the thing. It is actually a bit more intricate than that. Deconstruction serves to unravel the true origin of a text, true message of a text, because we become too sloppy, which is a very hard word. But what happens immediately once metaphysics of presence is established, everything, all the cogs has been put in place, it rids us of our perception of reality. And therefore, as an ersatz, as a proxy, we start this subject-object thing, and we get this diminished knowledge, which is very loose. And Kalle mentioned something about, I don't remember who said that, but everything of learning is concepts. It's not going to the core. So our perception is gone at the same time. And I would say it's rather fair to say that conception became established already by the time of the pre-Socratic. They already lost knowledge, lost the power to perceive. But then it was a steady development in the millennia where we got duller and duller and duller. Our thumbs, our fingers became duller. We used them in a less elegant and less precise way. Our reading became less precise. We did no longer get into the fractality of the text. to access deeper and deeper, and this blockage is more and more established. And we take it for granted. It becomes habituated. You get used to having less energy when you do things. Good way of thinking this is planning. Today is very common. Planning is putting together all episodes and making scenarios or sequences of scenarios. Instead of, as Bergson suggested, you project, you just think it. That is thinking. The other thing is rumination, mixing different thinking styles, and getting very far from the reality. I think there is a guilty factor as well. You think you become subjective when you project, when it's just the opposite. For us to live, and this is another division I'm going to get into at some other time, this difficult division between reality and myth. And this is share some similarity to origin and copy, or original cause and secondary cause. Big Bang supposed to be the primary cause, and everything that after that is successor causes caused by the original cause. And what caused the original cause? This picture, this gestalt, cannot tell, and you cannot ask that question within the system. Those questions are impossible. You cannot ask, once it's established, what was before the Big Bang. That is eroded out of the picture. Projection sort of disobeys the common law of difference between myth and reality, because projection cannot be a true successor of reality. It can't be a child of reality in that metaphysical presence way. It is completely new. Thinking is new. When we project, we should not obey impossible laws of reality / magic or myth. Susie Frobel goes into that. If you don't project with all your might, all your creativity, you will not get objective time. That time will not be shared by others. You will be this self-enclosed, non-interactive with time. You will have time almost like Ian McGilchrist spoke about reality, like a simulacrum. Having this non-real character. Reality tells itself. We don't designate the quality reality by a very cumbersome process of origin and cause and effect to come to the current moment, which I'm sitting in now. No, it is fractality that tells what is the true moment. It's the complexity. And the more complex your myth / reality is that you are project to the exogenous, the more you will receive back. If you don't send anything out forcefully, instead you have this idea that reality is just to be perceived, and you get this myopic vision. You don't send much out, and therefore you don't get much back. And that goes both for space and time. And this is the lacking of reality in space and time, and also knowledge, that makes this impetus. This is the driving force behind the looking for presence that all Westerners share today. This is, I would say, the primary goal in everything they do, looking for presence. I've seen it myself in different New Age circles, where they intently all the time look for this presence to come someday. And I think the most logocentric take on that was something I heard. It was just ludicrous. They even took it one step further, and they sort of said the goal was not to have a goal, and they sort of made it curve in on itself, and to make it even more firmly established. So you shouldn't, your goal should be not to have a goal for presence. And this is the sort of trickery that metaphysical presence is constantly doing. It turns into itself, it curves into itself, and thereby making the tendency stronger, more established, and even harder to loosen up. Because for each and other curving in, it becomes stronger. And in this little circle of people, giving up the goal was the biggest goal, not looking for full presence was the biggest goal, made it, of course, even more fossilized, more locked somehow. It was an incredible centrism, maybe the most incredible centrism I ever experienced. Made it accelerate beyond belief. And of course, this is one of those things that made Derrida say that the East is logocentrism pure and perfect. I actually disagree there, and I would take up that in a later lecture, but I do that in that case. I do actually disagree with Derrida, and not so much disagreeing in the way that he misunderstood anything, because that information he started with, I think, with that information, that knowledge he had from secondary sources in the Western world, like Alan Watts and D.T. Suzuki. It is obviously logocentrism. So his observation or his saying is absolutely correct from the point of Derrida. But I would still say, if you go to the core, if you start to deconstruct, you get a deconstruction that actually once more reveal and get you to full presence and full existence and those things that you strive for. So it's not centrism. I say this because I started to realize more and more that the deconstruction of Tartan Tolkien is just beyond belief. It's just incredible. And it has this other very important property, and that is a very good power when it comes to pedagogy, didactics, because this needs to be done in certain steps. Those steps can't be made in another way, and going in on the wrong level, this is also chaotic theory, chaotic organizational theory. Going in on the wrong level will make knowledge lock in a certain position, and you can't get any further. Something of the opposite of this group who was looking so much for presence. They thought another centric thing would to give up the looking for presence. How that could be possible is just ludicrous. It's a scary goal. It is like locking yourself up, and the key you get, you destroy, and the destroyed material you put in cement to make it even more inaccessible. And of course, this has also to do with time. Oddly enough, when you start to project, you get this long sort of presence. The thing you've been wanting all the way, it gets to you when you expand time. Just from the opposite, you look for the now, and you shut the other parts off from time. You say, this is the part I want, and I make the divisions by saying the other things are absent, they are of a lower degree, they should get rid of, they are the scapegoat, the absence, the past and the future. But if you invite past and future, you also get as a bonus presence, absolute presence in all directions. And this is very close to the take of space. Opposite from what you think, when you take the surrounding space to you and you expand your awareness, your sharpened awareness gets to the small things, the details, the filigrane of the fractality. That will actually get much stronger. And that is, of course, absolutely opposite from what you would expect from the perspective of the metaphysics of presence. That is definitely one of the surprises for me. But more about that later. Just to sum things up, you need to decisively project all what you have when it comes to imagination to make that future, and you think. You don't model. Thinking is not, and I think Frederick Matthias Alexander would say the same thing. Thinking is a straightforward thing. It is not based on division on past and real events. It is not taking a stamp of seal, this really happened, and then you have to put this episode into a certain sequence and see if you can get to the pharmacy in time, which is one of my objects today, maybe. No, you think in a projective way into the future, and the thinking is straightforward, doesn't have alternatives, so to speak. You forward your thinking, and that is also a physical act that you need to train. We become dull when it comes to projecting. Projection has become dull. We are not so good at futuring as we used to be a couple of centuries ago, and definitely not as good as we used to be during early antiquity. But that skill can always be trained and regained. So this is one of the aspects of Tartantoku which is so interesting. Both it's a deconstruction of the spiritual, of the mind, but also of the body. You learn the skill, and his books are filled with exercises. I won't mention any of those exercises now, but they are really good. Once you start training them, you do the activity, because in the end it's a marvelous doing. It can be relearned, and it can become incredibly strong. You just stick to it. Well, I think I finish off here. I say thank you very much, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye for now.